Hello everyone, welcome back to ArxangelRC. Today I have another camera comparison on my hands, and the new contender is the FireFly 8S, and it is the version with the 90-degree lens module. I have been wanting to get such a camera for a while, and to be honest, I do not regret it. I will be comparing it to my SJ7 Star, as all my other cams really just have no chance against these two. The FireFly comes with the standard set of accessories most action cams come with these days, but what I find interesting is that the battery in it looks a lot like the ones in the Action cameras, and those are some pretty cheap batteries, which can be both a good and a bad thing. The bad thing is that they are suspiciously cheap, which means quality may be questionable, but the good is that you can have a dozen of them for $30 and really not care how long they last. But here is the interesting part. I did test the endurance at some point and put the SJ7 and 8S side by side on my table at the field, and to my surprise both cameras lasted over an hour shooting 4K video. This would also allow me to show you the difference in the field of view between them. Both are set to the widest possible option in the firmware, and just look at the difference. You can see so much more from the SJ7's recording because it has a much wider lens, whereas the one on the S8 is noticeably narrower. And again, this has its drawbacks but also some advantages. In some situations you actually might need a wider view, and in this case the 8S with the 90-degree lens will not be the perfect solution, but actually in a lot of other situations the narrower lens is better. You get the same 4K resolution but in a smaller frame, which gives you higher detail if you want to crop in further. In contrast, the SJ7 spreads that 4K resolution on a wider frame, and cropping into the same size as the 8S with the 90-degree lens would actually reduce the resolution and quality of the image. Also, the narrower lens has a lot less distortion, which I assume a lot of people would find very alluring, since most of the complaints with most action cams have always been that they distort the image too much, but I guess there is no other way to have 170-degree field of view. Now, since Sofia is right next to a mountain and that mountain actually has ski slopes, I took both cameras with me when I went skiing so I can test them in a typical action camera situation before I go flying. And just in case you're wondering why it is dark, during a workday I can only make it to the ski track for the evening session. First of all, as you can see, having the camera on my head without any form of stabilization really does not result in anything usable or pleasant to watch, so I will move on to the 1080p stabilized test. Right from the start you can tell the stabilization on both cameras in this type of situation is complete crap. Thing is, I have tried using the SJ7 stabilization in more normal conditions and it still looks like crap and completely ruins the image, so at this point I'm really not certain why they even have it as an option. Might work for some slow moving shots, but you rarely buy an action camera for that. Actually, this is where the Action V8S did a lot better than these cameras, because not only does it have stabilization at the 4K recording setting, it was doing a much better job of stabilizing the image. But let's move on. Putting these two on a gimbal finally yielded some good results and some usable video that will not give you a headache in the first 10 seconds. Actually, the very first test was with the camera still at 1080p with the stabilization turned on, but I have to say, not doing as good of a job as the Action V8S in a similar situation. But at least it wasn't as bad compared to when they were not on a gimbal. The very next test was now in 4K mode on the gimbal, and finally this was the best looking video I got from that evening. Don't know about you, but it looks a lot better in pretty much every aspect compared to all the other options I tested. So now you know, if you need an action cam with stabilization, buy a gimbal. At least I have shown you proof that the Tech one works, so you have at least one viable option. Another option is to shell out the premium and get one of the latest GoPros. They do have some pretty amazing stabilization, but are quite a bit more expensive, and yet a lot more compact compared to a camera plus a gimbal. Last test was with the SJ7 put in the narrow field of view option, and it looks weird and I can definitely see more noise in the video. However, you may be glad to know that the FireFly 8S also did not look good on its narrow setting, although I do think that the narrow field of view option is actually at 90 degrees. The wider option looks to be over that, but still very minimal warping of the image, which is pretty nice. So So 4K on a gimbal is still my preferred way to shoot with this, as it appears, and despite the challenging lighting conditions on the track, both cameras performed very well without introducing too much noise in the video. I would have to say that for the time being they're pretty much on par when it comes to performance. And speaking of cameras on a gimbal, there was one more test I had to do: put them on the plane and fly. The morning when I did the first two flights had very low hanging clouds, and since I didn't want to get the cameras wet, I kept flight altitude to 150 meters and tried to do the same flight with both cameras. First thing you will notice is how much flatter the 8S image looks, which is a lot closer to what you get from a DJI Phantom, whereas the SJ7's image looks warped, as if there is a bow in the center and the image is warped around it. Not a lot of people like this effect, but it does give you a wider field of view, and at low altitude you can see more of the ground, which as a field of view is much closer to the human eyesight. On the FireFly 8S though, you don't get that effect, but at the narrower field of view at the same resolution allows you to digitally zoom in the image and still retain more detail and quality compared to the SJ7's video zoomed in the same way. Now, having flown a lot with the SJ7 doing cloud chasing, I thought it would be nice if I also did the same with the 8S, just to see how it would look. And as fate would have it, once those low-hanging thick clouds cleared up later in the day, some stunning new clouds formed some 10 kilometers away from me, and I just had to get there. Now, as far as overall image quality and color rendering, I would say both cameras are pretty much identical. Only major difference other than the lens is the fact that the 8S would work with all GoPro video out cables, whereas the SJ7 requires its own cable and will not be out of the box compatible with the video out cable of the gimbal. There is also the price, with the SJ7 being more expensive than the FireFly 8S with a 90-degree lens, and that one is more expensive than the version with the regular wide-angle lens. In addition, both cameras shoot 1080p at 120 frames per second and 720p at 240 frames per second, so you can have some amazing slow motion footage, and the FireFly actually has a mode specifically for this. Rather than record 1080p at 120 frames per second and then having to slow it down in post-processing, it actually records at 30 frames per second and the video is already slowed down when you play it, which is a cool option. Now, the lack of a touchscreen on the FireFly could be part of the reason why it is cheaper, but honestly I don't really mind. It prevents me from changing stuff on it while handling the camera when it is on. So to sum things up, the FireFly 8S is absolutely as capable as the SJ7 Star, which has been my benchmark camera until now, but the 8S is also cheaper, especially the wide-angle lens model. It uses cheaper batteries. Yes, I tested the Eken battery and it fits and powers the 8S just fine. Only difference is the Eken ones are not high voltage, but they are 4 times cheaper than the FireFly branded battery. And last, it is compatible with all GoPro based gimbals out there, especially when it comes to video out functionality. In addition, its stabilization is crap, just like the SJ7's, so basically the same camera for less money, and I do believe it is worth some attention. During my flight to the clouds, it recorded some outstanding video, and I do love the non-distortion lens a lot, so I think I have a new benchmark camera here. We'll definitely be using it a lot more from now on. So this about concludes this review. If you have found it useful, please give it a thumbs up, share and subscribe if you haven't already. I have now finally set up my very own Patreon account, so if you want to support me and what I do, please feel free to visit and do so. I would appreciate it a lot. Otherwise, all relevant product links are in the description below, and buying anything via those links would also help support this channel and again would be greatly appreciated. Happy flying, and until next time.